does not happens or not. CV is actually means something happens, but we will compensate the consumer as if does not happen, okay? And EV means, okay, the migration does not happen, but I will make you feel as if it happens. So this is the difference between CV and EV, okay? And now let's proceed to this slide. Actually, I think it's easy for this one, but it's better to make a graph so that you will understand better. Now, the market demand is the horizontal sum of individual demand curves, right? It's horizontal sum of individual demand curve. So the market consumer surplus is actually the sum of each individual's consumer surplus. Since market demand is the sum of individual demands, and also market consumer surplus is the sum of individual consumer surplus. So consumer surplus losses following a price increase, so it's now a price increase, are larger. When does the loss becomes larger? Okay, there are two situations here. And let me explain to you. D1, D2, P1, P1 prime, or PP prime. Sorry. Oh, price increase, sorry, P prime. So the price increases. So what do you think? Is D1 or D2? This is the loss of consumer surplus, right? The loss of consumer surplus. Because with the price increase, your consumer surplus will be decreased by this part, from a bigger one to a smaller one. Is that right? So this is the loss of consumer surplus. So which one do you think is bigger when the price goes up from P to P prime? Given D1 or D2, which one do you think will be larger? D2, right? Because the loss of consumer surplus would be this part. Okay? So when the initial quantity Q of the good is greater, the greater the initial Q, so the greater the greater the initial Q would be accompanied with a larger loss of consumer surplus. So this is the first part. And the second part, given the same initial quantity, D1, D2, and the new price, P from P to P prime, an increase in price. So which one do you think would be more elastic, D1 or D2? D1 is more elastic, right? D2 is less elastic. Is that clear for you? Elastic. So D1 is more elastic and D2 is less elastic because with the same size of price increase. However, if you if the market demand is D1, so the response would be larger. Okay, the response to the stimulus, to the price increase would be larger. So it is more elastic, and this would be less elastic. The less elastic, the demand curve at equilibrium. So when it is less elastic, the loss of consumer surplus would be larger than the more elastic. Okay? Get the point? So another big deal is quite simple here. Any question about this slide? All right, now we are going to talk about some effects of government policies. And quota. What is quota? Quota is actually a quantity limit or a limit on quantity. Quotas limit how much of a good consumers can purchase. Okay? So without any quota, without any limitation or any limit of quota or any limit on quantity. So given the budget line, and your optimal choice would be here, according to your indifference curve. So given E1 is the point that you may maximize your utility, all right? However, an effective quota. So without any limitation, you would like to consume 24, right? Your optimal solution on Q1, on commodity 1, would be 24. However, if there is a quota of 12 units, what does it mean by quota of 12 units? Which means you are limited or you are required to consume at most 12 units of Q1, of commodity 1. So quota of 12 units generates kink. This is a kink. This is a kink. Kink is something you feel, oh, smooth. Oops. It's something not very smooth. Actually, it's a kink. Okay? You feel stink here. So it's a kink. Quota generates kink in budget line and removes the shaded triangle region from individual choice set. So initially, your choice set is this large. But now, with the quota limit, so your limit to consume at most 12 units. So this policy take away this triangle from you. And now your budget set is like here, okay? So your budget set shrinks from this big triangle to this traploid, okay? 梯形. Alright, so initially you may consume to this point and get a higher utility. However, with the limit of quota, your best way or your optimal consumption would be at E2. Now let's talk about EV or CV issue here. The first thing is that if you are the government and you set a quota limit, this would be an effective, 有效的 effective quota limit. If you set a quota limit here, do you think it's effective or ineffective? It's ineffective, right? Because this restricts you to consume at most, but you actually consume here. You don't touch the limit. So your choice is still within the limit area, right? So this kind of policy would be ineffective. But with an effective quota, so now your budget set is this part. And you will choose this one to consume with a lower indifference curve. And it's Q1, Q2. So EV means if you want to stay as if there were no quota policy, and you will say, or you will talk to the government. You will persuade the government not to implement the policy. You will say, hey, hello, the government. What about you don't implement the policy, but I give you some money? You just take away some money from me, as if there were a policy, a quota limit policy. So without the quota limit, so it's just like this, okay? So if you give me some money, I will increase my budget set, but if you take away some money, my budget set would be smaller, right? So you may take some money from me, but not implement the policy, so that I will feel as the policy happened, or the policy had implemented. Okay? So this part would be the most amount, or the largest amount, the maximum amount of money you may take away from me. And I use this amount of money to convince you not to implement the quota limit policy. So this is EV. Do you remember I said EV happen? Does not happen. So EV is here, but we do some adjustment so that as if it happens. So when the policy happens, I will feel worse off from from U0 to U1, right? I will feel worse off. So if the policy did happen, my utility level would be like this. If you take away some money, a little bit money from me, I will feel better because I may choose a point. I may choose a point here, right? And this part, if my consumption falls within this part, my utility level will be higher than U1. Is that right? So I would like to communicate with the government that, okay, you may take away some money from me, but please don't implement the policy. And the maximum amount of money I'm willing to be taken from you, I will allow you to take money from me would be this amount. Because after taking away from me this amount of money, I will feel as if I'm here, right? So after taking the money, I will be here, but it locates on the same indifference curve as this one. So you don't implement, the government doesn't implement the policy, but making me as if the policy happened. Okay? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
So the initial equilibrium is tangent point U0 initial.
Yeah, this is the initial one, and this is before the policy, after the policy. Okay, without any intervention. Of course, E1 is worse than E0. However, I would say, okay, then what about you take away some money from me, making me stay at E2. E2 is some point that I am willing to accept because E2 is as good as E1, right? So you may take away some money from me, and at most, the money amount would be this part. So EV is the maximum amount of money I allow you to take away from me. And if you take more than EV, I would say, oh no, just please go on, implement your quota limit policy. Okay? So we may negotiate with the government. If we don't negotiate with the parliament, allowing the government to implement the quota policy, then we will be on E1. And E1 is not good because E0 is better without any quota policy, right? But I may negotiate with the government that, okay, would you please not to implement the quota limit policy? I give you some money, I want to buy off you, I want to bribe you, that not implementing. And the maximum amount I'm willing to pay to bribe you would be EV. Okay? So if I succeed to bribe you, then the policy would not be implemented. So I will be with a perfect budget line here without any kink. Without any kink. It's a complete triangle. It's a complete triangle. But this triangle with the budget line here will be the same as you implement the policy, because E1 and E2 fall on the same indifference curve. Is that clear? So initially, I consume here, and with the policy, my consumption will be here. And if I succeed to bribe you, to bribe the government, and negotiate with the government and pay this amount of money to him, to the government, then I will stay on E3. And there is no quota. I will stay on E3. And I will feel as well as I were here. Okay? So this would be the maximum amount of money I'm willing to pay to bribe the government or to negotiate with the government.
So when the E3 happens, that means the quota policy is cancelled, or it's not exist, doesn't exist anymore. Is that right?
Once again?
When the E3
Come again? Yeah, E3.
that means that the quota policy
Sure.
is cancelled.
Sure. Not implemented at all. There's no quota. So, on the contrary, what do you think would be the CV story for this case? Okay, you are the government. You now want to implement the quota policy, and the consumer feel harmed. And they just object to you. Objection. So you need to convince, of course, it's about the election. The election day is coming. So the government won't bribe the consumer or bribe the public that, okay, all right, I will compensate you. Still, I wanted to implement the policy because our President Ying say that, okay? Xiao Ying say the policy must be implemented. And our Vice President Lai say, okay, I will compensate you. So what do you think? He will compensate so that the policy is still implemented, but you feel as good as before. This point, right? Without any compensation, your budget set would be this. But if I compensate you, make you consume at this point, then this point will make you feel as good as before, right? And this part would be CV. Do you understand what I'm talking about? You've got to pay this part to bribe the government not implement the quota policy. But if on the contrary, if the government wants to compensate you so that you feel as good as before, all right, I have no way because the policy is suggested or is by the command of our commander, our chief commander, President Ying. So I got to implement this policy, but I may give you some compensation so that you will feel as good as before. Right? So this would be compensating variation. Understand the story? So CV is actually the policy happens, but I will compensate you as if it does not happen.
Roger.
Yes.
就是道理我懂，但是我很好奇为什么要这样做？就是政府实施一个这个政策，然后又补助你维持同样效果，就是有没有什么日常的举例？
Yep. For example, I want to tear down the marketplace. And of course you will object, right? And I will say, okay, I arrange another place so you may operate there, but the migrating cost or something, I will compensate you so that you will feel as good as as before. And you will be willing to migrate to a new place to operate your business, to run your business there. So that I may tear down the marketplace here, the building. Right? 市场改建 something like that.
那这不是数量管制吗？就是交易量。
Oh, you mean if there are any examples about this, right?
还是比如说什么台风天的那种冲突？
No. Let me see. Let me think. All right. Maybe it's not what they thought, but maybe it's a little bit close. All right. Now, COVID-19. So you cannot buy as many masks as you want. So there are quota limit. Okay. And all right, I give you $6,000 for everyone to make you don't feel that worse. Okay, it's kind of a policy bribe. I do something you don't like, but I do something, another thing. You may feel good. So just cancel off the bad you think of me. But not, the example I just proposed is not exactly, it depends on how they think about this one, all right? Probably they think in this way, probably not. But this is actually something we may apply. It's an example, and we may apply the analysis to be familiar with CV and EV. I just want to introduce to you these two concepts for every policy. So for each policy, there are always some CV part and EV part. So before and after. Before the policy, after the policy,